the God who has given these things to us. Well, let's talk a little bit about wealth in the Old Testament. I'm off already to a slower start than I intended. There's several ways we could go about this, but let's just talk about Job. Many consider this to be one of the oldest books of the Bible. How is Job, the main character, or one of the main characters in the book, depicted or described at the beginning of the book? Okay, he's rich, and the rich are always wicked, right? The rich are always rich because of their ill-gotten gain. Is that the case with Job? No. Well, maybe his friends thought that. But he's rich and, what's another word? Think like a preacher. What if you were going to alliterate? He's rich and righteous. There you go. Rich. Jay, were you the one that said that? No. Okay. Well, preacher too there. So we've got the gift of alliteration. He's rich and he's righteous. In fact, how rich and how righteous is he? He's kind of described as the richest. He's the greatest man in the East. So in wherever that is, whatever region he lived in, he was the richest man in that whole part of the world. And he seems to be described as the most righteous man in that part of the world, and one in which God looks upon him with great favor. Now, the adversary, Satan, makes an accusation about Job. What is the accusation? Yeah, of course he does the right thing. He does the right thing purely out of the stuff you give him. His righteousness is purely transactional. He does the right thing because doing the right thing gets him the good stuff. If you take away the good stuff, he'll curse you to your face and stop doing the right things. So God doesn't want Job to have this accusation made against him. So he allows Satan the freedom to take away the blessings to see what will happen. And when he takes away the blessings, what were the words? And he took them all away. He took away all of his riches, all his wealth, his prosperity, his children, everything. And he is even to the point of losing his health. And he's reduced to ashes and rubble. And what is his response? Yeah, that's right. Naked I came into the world, naked I will return. The Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. So all of heaven, looking down, observing this, waiting to see what's going to happen, erupts in praise and adoration because Job passes the test. God is vindicated, Job is vindicated, and Satan is proven to be a liar in this case. Job endures all of this trial and adversity throughout the course of the book, and at the end, he's rewarded with more material prosperity in the end than he had in the beginning. Proverbs talks a lot about wealth and riches and material prosperity. We could go into some detail there, but in the main, a lot of it is advice on how to acquire wealth. What are the disciplines that are necessary in a person's life in order to position themselves such that they can make money and keep money, use it wisely. It warns us against ill-gotten gain and tells us that it's better to be content with a little than to have great wealth unrighteously earned. But by and large, there's not a message in the book of Proverbs that's negative toward material prosperity, but it's pretty positive. The patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, wealthy or poor? Yeah, they're all of them quite wealthy. And then there's what we might just call theology of the covenant in the book of Deuteronomy in particular, which goes into quite a bit of detail about the children of Israel being promised blessing, material blessing, as a result or consequence of faithful covenant living. Now, in some ways we can look at this and see a causality simply because the things that God requires are the things that will inevitably lead over time to material prosperity. Just as an example, if a guy quits his cocaine habit, quits visiting prostitutes, gets married, settles down, disciplines himself to get an education, goes to work, shows up on time every day, does the best that he can, over time, what's likely to happen to him in terms of his financial situation? Going to get better or worse? Yeah, it's going to get better. That's almost a guarantee. Now, there certainly could be exceptions, but by and large, that's the way that's going to work. Now, if you extract that out over the course of generations, this guy does that, brings up his children in that sort of environment, and they sort of start in a position more privileged than he was when he started, and yet they carry on with the practices that he's taught them. What's their conditioning likely to be? Better yet. So it makes sense that living according to the terms of God's word and covenant would result over time in increased prosperity. And that's exactly what we see promised. He says in Deuteronomy 8, beginning in verse 10, when you have eaten and are satisfied, praise the Lord your God for the good land he has given you, and be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God, failing to observe his commands, his laws, his decrees that I'm giving you this day. So he anticipates that the children of Israel will go into the land of Canaan. They will prosper there. And he also implies in this that there's a danger awaiting them in this prosperity. What is that? That you might do so well that you just start forgetting about God. So don't let that happen, and continue to honor God, to honor his laws, to remember the Lord. He says in chapter 11, if you faithfully obey the commands I'm giving you today, to love the Lord your God and to serve him with all your heart and your soul, then I will send rain on you, on your land in its season, both autumn and spring rains, so that you may gather in your grain, new wine and olive oil. I will provide grass in the fields for your cattle, and you will eat and be satisfied. Be careful, or you will be enticed to turn away and worship other gods and bow down to them. So again, there's an anticipation of God prospering them materially, with a warning, again, that if you forget God and turn away from him and go after these false gods, all of your prosperity will go away. It continues. If they turn after these idols, then the Lord's anger will burn against you. He will shut up the heavens so that it will not rain, and the ground will yield no produce. And you will soon perish from the good land the Lord is giving you. Fix these words of mine in your hearts and minds, and tie them as symbols on your hands, and bind them on your foreheads. Teach them to your children, talking about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates, so that your days and the days of your children may be many in the land the Lord swore to give your ancestors, as many as the days that the heavens are above the earth. Or as some translations put it, that your days may be as the days of heaven on earth. So there's both a length of time and a quality in that time that is promised to them if they walk faithfully in terms of the covenant that God is giving them. When you think about the basic form of that covenant given in the Ten Commandments, honoring God, and then the way that they are to treat each other, not murdering, not stealing, not coveting each other's stuff, not bearing false witness against each other, do those kinds of laws create a society and an environment in which there's high trust and in which prosperity is most likely to begin to take root and occur? Well, of course. And so again, it makes sense from even the most basic human point of view that this is the basis for prosperity. But also within this is the idea that the world's not a closed system, and that God is able to observe the actions that people take and bless them accordingly. Sending rain, for instance, causing the land to prosper. There's also built within the covenant provision for the needy, isn't there? What would be a law, for instance, that would require that of the people? Yes. Okay. When you harvest your fields, you leave the edges unharvested. And you only go through the field how many times? Once. And anything you left behind, you leave behind. For who? Yeah, for the poor, so that they can come through and gather for themselves what they needed. Same thing with your vineyards. You only harvest it once, or your olive orchard. You leave something on the margin for those who are less fortunate and in need. There's also the idea of the Sabbath principle as well, isn't there? That you don't just focus on productivity to the exclusion of everything else. You also, in terms not only of space, do you leave a margin for the needy, but in terms of time, you leave a margin for your rest and devotion to God, and remembrance that you are reliant and dependent upon God for everything that's coming your way. So both in time and space, there is something to be left out, acknowledging God and acknowledging other people. So that's the covenant of Moses to the people and the promises there. One other, Deuteronomy 28, 47 and 48, because you did not serve. On this one, he anticipates their turning after false gods, ignoring the covenant, violating all of these laws, and here will be the consequences of that. Because you did not serve the Lord your God joyfully and gladly in the time of prosperity, therefore in hunger and thirst, in nakedness and dire poverty, you will serve the enemies the Lord sends against you. He will put an iron yoke on your neck until he has destroyed you. What really strikes me most about this particular passage is the specific reason he cites here for their downfall. What is it?
Not serving the Lord joyfully and gladly.
Yeah. You didn't celebrate enough. You had all of the material prosperity, but you didn't rejoice gladly in that prosperity. Is it possible to have extreme abundance and material prosperity and still lack joy and gladness in the prospering? I think quite obviously. What is it that makes the abundance really something that brings forth the joy? Okay, yeah, sometimes it requires that lack of abundance in order for us to appreciate when it is there. I guess what I'm asking, though, is that when it is there, just having a lot in itself is not enough. It's almost like there has to be something else to complete the gratitude. Man, that makes all the difference, doesn't it? And that's what he's pointing to here. Is there's got to be celebration that comes from sort of a sense of, I can't believe God's treated me this well. And when we can celebrate and joyfully and gladly honor God in our prosperity, that's when it becomes a genuine blessing. And if we leave that part out and we just begin to luxuriate in the blessing itself, the kid on Christmas morning who forgot all about mom and dad who gave me the gifts, and it's just the gifts, then this isn't going to end well. All right, so that's a good deal of what the Old Testament, I think, teaches us about this. And then there's a notion that some have, that there's a radical change in the New Covenant, but I don't think there is. I think it basically teaches us the exact same kind of thing. It's that material wealth is a blessing. It's a blessing that God's people need to learn to handle well and wisely. Jesus said something about taking up deadly serpents, and money may be the deadliest of serpents that we need to learn how to handle and not be devoured by them. Paul says to Timothy in 1 Timothy 4, the Spirit clearly says that in latter times some will abandon the faith and follow after deceiving spirits and things taught by demons. So have you ever wondered what a demon would teach if it had the opportunity to get his message into the church? Well, he would do that teaching through a vehicle, and that teaching would come through hypocritical liars. So demons work through hypocritical liars with seared consciences, and here's what those demons teach: that people should not marry, and that they should abstain from certain foods. In other words, it's maybe the opposite of what you might have expected Paul to say to Timothy. That the devil is going to tell people to just party hard, right? But that's not what he says. He says when the devil tries to do his work through these hypocritical liars, their message is one of extreme abstention. Touch not, taste not, handle not. This material creation is bad, it's evil, have nothing to do with it. Don't enjoy any of the blessings that God gives you. And that's a common teaching that you hear people say, that anything material is evil and the spiritual thing to do is to have nothing to do with it. But where did these material blessings, food and marriage and the physical relationship within marriage, where did that come from? From God. God created these to be received how? With thanksgiving. By who? Those who believe and know the truth. For everything God created is good, and nothing is to be rejected if it is received with thanksgiving. So again, there's the idea that material prosperity is a blessing from God to be received with gratitude and thankfulness by those who believe and know the truth. Now then, a teaching from Jesus, Mark 10, 29 and 30. Jesus said, truly I say to you, there is no one who has left house or brothers or sisters or mother or father or children or lands for my sake and for the gospel. So let's just stop there for a second. In other words, there may be times in your life that in order to be a faithful Christian, a faithful disciple of Jesus, you might have to give up what? Everything. You may have to give up your material wealth. You may have to give up your house. You may have to give up your lands. You may even have to give up some of your physical relationships with family. That could happen. But what does he promise? Those who give those things up. Those who give them up will receive 100-fold, what? Now in this time, what? Houses, brothers, sisters, family, children, with lands, and it may come with persecutions, and in the age to come, eternal life. So I think Jesus is saying, you got to approach life in the kingdom with very much an open hand, and you may enjoy houses and lands and family, and there may come a time when, just because of the way things are, that you have to be willing to let all of that go in order to be faithful to God. And what you will likely discover in doing that is that giving up the associations you had before, you're going to find that you receive much, much more. I had a Bible study in China with a man who was multiple generations deep as being the shaman of his village. Pagan to the core, deep into ancestor worship and all this stuff. And shaman in those kind of villages are very honored. Everything filters through them. And he was taught the gospel, and he was beaten. He lost everything. He lost his wealth. He lost his family, all of that. And this had happened many years prior to my meeting him. And just hearing his story was just really amazing. But he talked about this passage and how what he had received as a Christian had so far and away surpassed everything that he had known in his life as a witch doctor for all practical purposes. And I think that's an interesting thing. Did I see a hand over here earlier?
Yeah, I was thinking about Paul taking that a step further in talking about contentment in every circumstance,
Mm-hmm.
whether you had a lot
Okay.
or very little. The contentment seems to be
A very key
priority
part.
here with all of this that we're discussing.
Yeah.
He takes it even into the negative when he doesn't have anything.
Yeah.
To be content.
Yeah. And
Still praising God.
still praising God in good times and bad. And really, probably a person who can't be content and happy with little is probably not going to be content and happy with much, right?
Well, this is on the heels of the rich man, too,
Yeah, yes,
who didn't want to part with anything.
anything. Yeah, rich young ruler. Very good. One other passage real quick here. 1 Timothy 6, 17 through 19. Command those, what is a preacher supposed to say to rich folks? Well, in modern America, this is pretty much for all of us. We're all rich folks. But he says, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, not to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Why does God give us the things he gives us? For our enjoyment. God, again, all the things we've been talking about. God wants to bless his people and wants them to have things for them to enjoy. But what are some mistakes that we can make as we receive his gifts? Well, we could become arrogant. Look at what I've got. We could put our hope, we could turn away from God, put our hope in wealth. He goes on, command them to do good. There ought to be a parity between our increasing wealth and our increase in generosity or increase in giving. They ought to be rich in good deeds, generous, willing to share. And in this way, tying into our lesson Sunday, this way they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. So by doing good, by being generous, by helping others, they're laying up treasures in heaven, as Jesus would put it. Now, a few other caveats and warnings that Jesus gives us. In Luke 12, this is in the context of Jesus teaching, and this would have just been an amazing thing to see. He's teaching, and finally somebody in the crowd just hollers out, "Hey, Jesus, tell my brother to give me my share of inheritance. My, Dad kicked the bucket, and my brother is the executor of the will, and he's not giving me all the things that should be mine." And Jesus' response was, "Man, what? Who made me a judge over you? But I'll tell you what, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." That's such a powerful statement. It's one that I just think of very frequently. Anytime I get a case of the wants. You ever just get a case of the wants? They got to have it. They give me, the things that the advertisers really love to pull out of us. Jesus says, remember, your life is not about all the things that you possess. Life is about so much more about your relationships. It's about your faith, your hope, your peace and joy. It is so much more than this thing that you think you need. Man's life does not consist in the abundance of things he possesses. But our priority has to be God's kingdom and God's righteousness, seeking those things first and foremost, and then laying it all before God and trusting him to provide us with everything else that we need. We must be willing again to let it all go at a moment's notice, as was the rich young ruler's challenge. and we must all be willing to deny ourselves and take up our cross and follow Jesus. Well, those are some thoughts I wanted to work through, just a lot of scriptures there, but I wanted to end our last 10 minutes opening up some discussion based on some just what I called random and disconnected thoughts. This is the way my brain usually is. The first was you can't always tell who the righteous are by the scoreboard. There's two myths. One is the righteous, poor, wicked, rich myth. The other is the righteous, rich, and lazy, poor myth. And those things are not always accurate. And so the point is, don't try to determine superficially a person's godliness or righteousness by how rich or poor they are. That's between them and God. And we should take Jesus' admonition to focus on the specks that accumulate in our own eyes rather than in the beams that we perceive to be in somebody else's eyes. So you can't tell who the righteous are necessarily by the scoreboard. And there's a passage that really nails that to me, a little bit lengthy here, but Hebrews 11:32 through 38. Here he's talking about these heroes of the faith under the Old Testament. He says, I don't have time to tell you about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets who, look at what they did, conquered kingdoms, administered justice, gained what was promised, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, who became powerful in battle and routed foreign enemies. Even their wives received back their dead, raised to life again. The winners, okay, the powerful, the mighty, the movers, the shakers, the kings, the prophets, the judges, and people who just were winning. Were they righteous? Yeah, they were. And they're raised up for us here as heroes of the faith. And there were others, he goes on in the next verse and says, who were tortured, refusing to be released so that they may gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and floggings and chains and imprisonment. Some were put to death by stoning, sawed in two, killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and holes in the ground. Now, which of those two lists is a list of the righteous? Both, okay? You can't tell who the righteous are necessarily by looking at outward appearances and the scorecard. Any thoughts or comments on that? Yes.
Would that be the same as whenever you're at church lesson, it's about you taking it in and you can do your weekly day versus, hey, this is for my mom and this is for my kid?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at that. Yeah, very good. Anything else? Yes.
It's easy for us not to give worth to people if they don't have very rich money or things. And how much people have does not make a person worth more or less.
Okay, excellent. How might we illustrate that in a pretty profound way?
The way we treat them.
Okay, yes, the way we treat them. I guess what I'm saying, who might we recognize as a person of supreme worth who did not have a very high net worth from this world's point of view? Yeah, like Jesus, right? The foxes have holes in the ground, the birds have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to rest his head. So he was rich who became poor for our sakes, as we talked about Sunday, in order that we through him might be rich. So Jesus lived a poor man's life in this world, and yet is the most valuable person to have ever lived. And we make a terrible mistake when we judge from outward appearances and despise. And James has a great point to make about that, of a person coming into a church service dressed and is obviously poor and is relegated to some obscure place, while we give a position of prominence to the wealthy. In doing so, we're way off base. So, good point. Secondly, don't judge others, focus on yourself, which is similar to that. Thirdly, don't glorify or despise ascetics. Ascetics. What's an ascetic? Okay, that's true. Yeah. An ascetic is someone who decides they're going to give everything away and just live a life of extreme poverty, okay, extreme self-denial. There's many people in history who do that, and sometimes they're extremely honored for having done so, and maybe it's an honorable thing to do. It certainly could be. But again, maybe we sometimes do those things for the wrong motivations. Paul says, if I give all my worldly possessions away, but have not love, it profits me nothing. So there's sometimes a way of doing even things that are quite radical on the appearance of generosity, but again, God knows the heart. But there's also, I think, a value in it, and there's for some people. Some people may recognize that this is the only way for me. Okay, I can't handle prosperity and wealth, and so I'm giving everything away to live like this. And probably enough on that. I won't get to this. There are times for extravagance. There are times for extravagance. What might be an example of that? Okay, a wedding, yeah. Wedding's a big deal. So, sometimes people go over the top, I think, but it's a great thing to celebrate. Okay. Yeah, it's worth taking notice of, and to kill the fatted calf and to make merry and celebrate. What about the woman who took an alabaster flask of fragrant oil, pure nard, a year's wages, and she broke it over Jesus' body to anoint him for his burial? What did, I think it was Judas and maybe some others, say about that? Yeah, what a waste, they said. That was a waste. You could have sold this and given it to the poor, although we already know what Judas's motives about that really were. But what did Jesus think about this act of extravagance that just seemed to be wasteful? Yeah, he said, the poor are with you always, and you can do good to them anytime that you want. And he certainly teaches us to do that. But she has done, he said, a beautiful thing for me. And not only that, he said, wherever the gospel is preached, the story of what she has done for me should be told. So I like to preach that story. So here's an act of extreme devotion and extravagance on behalf of Jesus to honor him, and he said that was appropriate. I've often wondered, I've gone back and forth about things like great cathedrals. Like, is that a good thing or a bad thing? You got all these poor people who are living below poverty when these massive cathedrals were being built, and it's like that money should have gone to feed the poor. But I wonder even if the poor who lived at those times would say, yeah, but now that I've been dead and gone for 1,000 years and this cathedral still stands and people go there and they are overwhelmed with a sense of awe and wonder, that they wouldn't say that was the right thing to do. Maybe there's a right time for extravagance as well. All right, one last point, beware of luxuriating in the last days. James chapter 5, verses 1 through 5 is the sternest warning in the Bible about wealth. And don't be someone who just reaches a point when a society is on the threshold of collapse, and rather than using that money appropriately just decides to use it to just lavish upon themselves. Read James 5 if you want to know what I'm talking about. Thank y'all.